Hi everyone, welcome to The Path to Reason. I'm your host Cindy Plaza, and tonight we have a very special guest. His name is Dominique Eckert and he's an astrophysicist. Hi Dominique, how are you?
Hi Cindy, it's a pleasure. Thank you. I'm fine. How about you?
I'm terrific. So can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I'm Dominique Eckert. I'm an astrophysicist in Geneva, Switzerland. I'm 39 years old, and I've been active as an astrophysicist for the past 15 years. I'm now a senior lecturer at Geneva University, and my field of study is what we call extragalactic astrophysics, meaning astrophysics of the objects beyond our own galaxy. So somewhere in between what we would call classical astronomy and cosmology. My own field of study is observations. So I use telescopes to study the universe around us, and especially the large-scale structure of the universe. So how galaxies are getting together and forming large-scale structures, and how these structures, how the universe is evolving with time, from today until the very beginning, meaning, well, not sure it's a beginning, we discussed that, right?
Yeah.
But from what we call the observable beginning, at least. So from today until the early times of the universe. I hope that's clear.
Yeah. So we are here tonight to talk about the Kalam cosmological argument, which is very often brought by religious apologists, not just Christian apologists, but also Muslim apologists sometimes, to try and prove the existence of God. And so we are going to talk about it in detail later. But before, I would like to come back to some basics of logic, because I've observed in the last debates I've been watching that sometimes apologists tend to mix deductive and inductive arguments, especially in the case of the Kalam. So I'm going to go back to the basics and explain what's the difference between those two different types of argument. So a deductive argument is basically the strongest argument there is. If you have two true premises, then the conclusion is true 100% of the time. So the hardest part is to define if the premises are true or not. And they have to be true, again, 100% of the time. You cannot say something is probably the case in a deductive argument, because if you do, then it becomes an inductive argument. An inductive argument is an argument where one of the premises is probable or possible or most likely, and then the conclusion can only be as strong as the weakest premise, which means it will be most likely or probable or possible as it was in one of the two premises. The reason why I bring this up is because sometimes there is a confusion when we have a premise containing the word all or none, which is an absolute premise. For example, if I say my first premise of my argument is all men are born with 4 limbs, that means my argument, my premise has to apply to every single human. And we know that not all humans are born with 4 limbs. On the other hand, if I say humans are born with 4 limbs, that's a generalization, and it's the most rigorous case. And in that case, it's if I build an argument on this, it will be an inductive argument, because humans in general are born with 4 limbs. So you cannot change from one to another and say all humans are born with 4 limbs, and when you're shown the evidence that it's not the case, then you say, yeah, but most of them or almost all of them are born with 4 limbs, and then keep up with the deductive argument. That's against logic. You cannot, if your premise is not true 100% of the time, if it's only true 99% of the time, then it becomes an inductive argument. Are you okay with what I just said, Dominique, so far?
Pretty much. So I would say yes, indeed, an inductive argument comes in when we have a lot of observations of a given phenomenon, but we are not able to observe every case that there ever exists. And then we can try to make a generalizations out of these various observed cases and think that there must be a rule that applies everywhere, which we cannot, of course, demonstrate because we don't have access to all the possible cases.
Okay. So yeah, now we clear that up. We can start with the first premise of the argument. It's whatever begins to exist has a cause. So what do you think about this first premise?
Okay, so what I should say is that if we think rather, well, I would rather tend to think that all of these arguments would have to come together in cosmological terms. So like, if so the actual argument, right, would be everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe has a beginning, therefore the universe has a cause, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of the universe, there is one thing that is actually normally not discussed by people who are not really familiar with the field, and that is that what we call the Big Bang theory is based on what we call classical theory of gravity, so general relativity. So gravity, we have this theory of gravity that was invented by Einstein in 1915 that we call general relativity, and that's the theory that we use to describe the evolution of the universe, and that is what we do up until what we would call the beginning then, because we can see that galaxies around us are moving away from us. They seem to be moving away from us wherever you look. So like, if you look in one direction, then you look in a completely different direction, you will see, it will look like all the galaxies are moving away from us.
And faster and faster.
We interpret this by saying that the universe itself is expanding. And then, of course, if you think that the universe is expanding, then you can go back. And if you go back in time, then it means that it must have been smaller in the past, up until the point where it would reach but a single point, some sort of singularity. And that's what we would call the Big Bang. The main problem with that idea here is that the theory we use, which is general relativity, does not apply in the very early universe. So there is, we have nowadays two main theories in modern physics. general relativity to describe gravity, and quantum physics, which describes the other forces on the microscopic level. That would be electromagnetism and the weak and strong nuclear forces. And those two theories are extremely successful to describe what's going on in their own field of in their own field of validity, in the area where they are valid. The problem is that they're not consistent with one another. So it means, from a theoretical point of view, you cannot reconcile those two theories. What this means is that we are missing, there is a piece of the puzzle we are missing right now, and that is what we generally call theory of everything, which would be a theory of physics that both general relativity and quantum physics derive.
Yeah, it's like having.
And we don't have such a thing.
Yeah, it's like having two big chunks of pieces in a puzzle, and you don't know how they fit together because you're missing the boundaries between the two.
Yeah, you're missing the global picture. It's like there should be all the laws of physics as we see them should derive from a single theory that we would call the theory of everything, and that would include both general relativity and quantum physics. But currently we don't have such a theory.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. What I wanted to say is that the early universe, like the very early universe, what we would call the very early universe here would be really just the fraction of a second after what we call the Big Bang. The conditions that apply in this regime are such that if we want to describe these conditions, we need both theories to work at the same time, which we currently cannot do.
Okay, so I just realized that we have the same problem with evolution, where apologists tend to mix abiogenesis and evolution, and it seems to me like this is the same situation. We have current cosmology that explains how the universe evolved, but we don't have a theory on how it was born. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yes, we basically, after some fraction of a second after the Big Bang, our theory of general relativity applies. We can use it to make predictions on what the universe should be, and we can confront it with observations, and actually we see that it matches extremely well with a lot of the observations that we can do. But whatever is going on before that, we simply cannot say from the point of view of physics. So saying that the universe had a beginning, we cannot prove it.
Yeah, we don't even.
We are just not in a position to say it.
We don't even have the tools to make an educated guess, right?
We don't really. I mean, there are possible theories, right? So that there's basically, now it's been a century or so that theoretical physicists have been looking for such a theory, and there are some possible theories that make educated guesses, and they're mainly dealing with multiple dimensions. So, like we think that the theory of everything as we expect it to be should have multiple dimensions, many more than the 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal dimension that
11
we are used to experience in our everyday life.
Yeah, so when we go back to the first premise, we say whatever begins to exist has a cause. Can we affirm that with 100% certainty?
Yeah, I think there is another problem with that particular premise. And so we can take this, in the case of the universe, we can take it two ways. So either we try to have a completely classical description of the universe, meaning assuming that what general relativity says, that there would be a beginning where everything comes from a single point in space and time. If we assume that that is a real description, then the problem with that is that the time starts at this point. Before the Big Bang, there is no time. Actually, before the Big Bang is not a meaningful statement. And when you talk about causality, causality always presupposes time, right?
Yeah.
It means something happens before, and has a cause that happens later. That is always the case. If time does not exist, causality does not exist.
So, by definition, a timeless being cannot be the cause for anything?
I mean, I would not go so far as talk about timeless being because I don't know what that is, right?
But yeah, the claim is
just in terms of causation. Causation presupposes time. If there is no time, then there's no way to describe what is a cause of what.
so. Have we ever observed particles that appeared from apparently nowhere or nothing?
Not really. So
No.
there is one effect that we call pair production, and that is that the empty space, vacuum, contains some energy. And sometimes there can be spontaneous creation of what we call pairs of particle-antiparticle out of empty space. That is a quantum effect. But there is no actual creation in that sense here, because there was energy before. And in actually back from special relativity, mass and energy are the same thing. So there was energy before, which was just converted into mass eventually.
Okay.
But there is no creation in the sense of these particles appearing out of nowhere.
It's like a chemical reaction, basically.
Yeah, it's the energy transforms, right?
Yeah. So we have no way to determine in a way or another if it's possible for anything to appear from nothing, because we don't have nothing to observe, right?
We don't observe nothing, that's for sure, yes. If you observe something, then it's something, right?
Yes, so my point is, from a non-theistic perspective, we cannot say that we've observed, as I've heard sometimes, particles appear from nothing, because we cannot, by definition, observe nothing. And even though we wanted to prove the statement that nothing can come from nothing, we couldn't prove it, or we couldn't disprove it, right?
As long as you cannot observe nothing, then you cannot.
Yes.
You cannot make such a conclusion. I agree.
So we cannot say whatever begins to exist as a cause with 100% certainty, right?
We cannot say that with 100% certainty.
We can say that everything we've observed so far beginning to exist had a cause, and we can make an inductive argument based on that, but we cannot make a deductive argument. Correct?
I agree. So my cat says hi. I agree with this point. So I would say in the case of the universe, the fundamental point is that there are two ways of seeing the beginning of the universe, either in a classical way, as I've explained before, in which case time actually begins at the Big Bang. So their causality before the Big Bang does not make sense. Or the other way would be to think about some extension of physical theory as we know it nowadays, so this sort of theory of everything. But in that case, basically, we are not in a position right now to make any firm statement about what we expect it to be, simply because we don't have this knowledge yet. So making such a statement out of the theory of everything is an argument from ignorance.
Okay. So in the same way that we cannot talk about how life appeared on Earth when we're talking about evolution, we cannot say that the universe began to exist because we only have a cosmology that allows us to study what happened after the Big Bang, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's the same thing. So like, evolution presupposes there is life.
Yeah.
However, life, it doesn't say how life appeared in the first place.
Yeah.
And that would be the same for classical cosmology, classical in the sense of general relativity, that it can be very precise in predicting how the universe actually eventually evolves with time, but it cannot give a reason for why it evolved in such a way in the first place, or why it appeared in the first place.
So basically, we have two premises that state something they cannot provide evidence for in 100% of the cases. So the best we can have here is, therefore, the universe probably had a cause. Or most likely, or as far as we know, or...
I mean, I wouldn't even go so far personally. It's at this point we are in the regime of ignorance. That's what we have to say. I mean, and that's why we have physicists nowadays, right? We are not done with physics. It's not finished. So at this point, that's what I would say. And in fact, you would even go that's for the first premise. I would say, in either way, you cannot prove that everything that begins to exist has a cause. And in the case of the second premise, as I said, we cannot describe what happened before what we call Planck time. That is the time at which those two theories of general relativity and quantum physics start to be both important at the same time. So we cannot describe yet what's going on at that time.
Yeah, so in the second premise, we cannot even say that the universe began to exist.
Yeah, we cannot say that because we cannot describe what was going on before Planck time. And in fact, there are some very plausible theories right now that do not involve the beginning. So it's
Yeah.
for instance, it could very well be that the universe had a contraction phase in the past, then reached a state, and then eventually started inflating again. That could very well be something we cannot disprove nowadays.
It's interesting because in the last few months I've been watching videos about another possible explanation for the birth of our universe, and I'm going to talk about it later. But before that, I'd like to go to the second part of the Kalam, if it's okay with you.
Sure. Please go ahead.
So the second part uses, hold on. So yeah, the second part uses the conclusion of the first part as a first premise. So the universe has a cause. If the universe has a cause, then an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists, without which the universe is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful.
That's just a bunch of assertions.
Yeah, which
there is no way to prove any of that.
Yeah, it's like a magician taking out rabbits out of his hat, you know. There is absolutely no link between those 5 or 6 qualifiers to the rest of the arguments. So where do they come from?
I'm not the right person to ask that.
Well, they come from the Bible, but yeah. So an uncaused personal creator. That's so we talked about the uncaused part, and I'll come to it a little bit deeper in a few minutes. But I don't see the reason why there is this personal creator. What do you make of it?
Not much. I mean, as I said, for me as a scientist, I care mostly about what I can study, especially as I said, as a disclaimer, I'm not a theorist myself. I'm an experimentalist, so I care mostly about what I can observe and what I can deduce from the observations that I make. Then, from that point of view, this is just baseless claims, in my opinion, and I just don't see how they can ever prove anything about that.
Yeah, because this uncaused is, as we said, impossible to prove, because and even impossible at all, because if it's timeless, it cannot be there cannot be causation. Then there's the beginningless, which means that if God wasn't there, then the universe wouldn't have any beginning. That's another claim without a shred of evidence. Changeless. Why would a God make a universe being able to change? I don't see the connection between the two. I mean, it's entirely possible from a Christian perspective to have what they call a prime mover, a God that just created the universe and then let it work, just like evolution. Some Christians say that God is responsible for abiogenesis, and evolution is responsible for the diversity of life as we know it now. So I don't see the point here of this changeless immaterial. Again, how can you prove that the universe would be immaterial without a God? How to what universe can you compare it to?
Yeah, I agree with all your points, obviously. I think that from a scientific, from the point of view of physics, nowadays some reasonable case can be made for, not one that would accept, but some reasonable case can be made for a deistic God. So one that would be, as you said, some sort of prime mover. Going beyond that is absolutely impossible on the basis of the current knowledge.
So to me, this argument seems like a cop-out to the problem of infinite regress, because basically it serves as as an explanation for this problem of infinite regress, right? Because most theists don't argue about what happened before the creation of our local universe, but they need to shoehorn God at the beginning of our universe, because if we found a naturalistic explanation for the creation of our universe, then what would be the cause for this naturalistic event? And again and again and again. I've seen a few videos explaining that the singularity that originated the Big Bang could be coming from, in certain circumstances, from a black hole. Because on one hand we have something that absorbs light, matter, energy, and on the other hand we have a single point where we have matter, energy, and all condensed in a very small place. So would it be possible that one creates the other? But if we accept this this hypothesis, then what created the first universe that generated the first black hole that created the universes? See what I mean?
Yes, so indeed, the parallel with black holes, I think, is a relevant one, because the central regions of black holes are and there are very few places in the universe where we can say that we cannot describe the physical conditions of those places with either general relativity alone or quantum physics alone. And those places where we know that we cannot do that are the very early universe and the central regions of black holes. And there is a funny coincidence or not, I don't know, but sounds like a funny coincidence, which is that the size of the observable universe right now correspond to is roughly the same as the expected size of a black hole that would have the mass of the observable universe. So indeed, there is such an idea that could be that we are in fact living inside one big black hole. We cannot prove that right now, as far as I know. And in fact, I'm not sure it's even really consistent with the observations. But yes, that's a parallel that can be made.
Yeah, the way I understood it is that at some point, under certain conditions, after absorbing so much matter and energy, it's like, to make it visual and more simple, it's like this black hole would just poop out a singularity that would develop on its own as a new universe.
It's an idea.
But it's much more plausible than an unknown, beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless creator, because it only comes from natural and observed phenomena.
Yes, I think that's a key point, because we know that the physical laws exist. So if you can explain something based on the physical laws only, then you know that your explanation is based on something that we know is real. If you add on top of that something that is outside of the laws of physics, then clearly you have an extra step to make in order to get there. And that extra step is to show that there is something outside of the laws of physics, which currently we cannot prove. As the universe as we see it, especially in our everyday life, is very predictable.
Yeah.
It's very predictable. It's very rare that something happens, especially on our macroscopic scale. It's very rare that something happens where we could say we don't know how to observe that, or there is no way to observe that with the laws of physics as we know them.
Yeah, so this Kalam cosmological argument is a way to avoid having to discuss this issue, because if you have a naturalistic explanation for the birth of our local universe, then you get into the infinite regress problem, and then since we are going into outside our universe, then everything we would say is just talk, because there's no way at the moment to study what happens outside our universe. So the reason why, in my opinion, this Kalam cosmological argument exists, it's because they want to lock the argument to the beginning of our local universe, because they know that if we go beyond that, they cannot provide any justification.
Yes, I think it's a big argument from ignorance in the end. We have no way of knowing, at least right now, what were the conditions at the beginning of the universe as we know it. Therefore, God.
Yeah. So how can we solve this infinite regress problem? Can we?
The question is, if you ask me, I'm not sure that there is an infinite regress problem, because it could very well be that the universe itself was eternal. As I said, it could be that it arose. In the end, it came together because of something else that was there in whatever form. Or, as I said, there is this possible idea even that there was a contraction period which later went to an inflation period. So, and then there's this idea of causation not existing in the absence of time. So I think right now we are just not in a position to say whether there is such an infinite regress problem or not.
Okay, that's fair. Do you have anything else to add to this argument?
I mean, what I should add is that at least on my side, I was rather unfamiliar with this argument until recently. So like I started watching shows online and found that a lot of religious people were using it. I never really I never really heard that argument beforehand. For me, as a physicist, and it's not like you go to a cosmology conference and people talk about William Lane Craig's brilliant argument. No one does that. So in this respect, for me, that was a little bit surprising when I started to see how deep people think this argument is. Because from the point of view of modern physics, it's not compelling at all.
And I would add that even though you don't have any, well, almost any knowledge in physics, from the basic standpoint of logic, it falls apart. Because the first premises claim things that we cannot possibly claim at the moment. Well, yeah, for the second premise, you need to know that you need to understand what the Big Bang Theory model is, that it only explains after the Planck time, but other than that, you don't really need any knowledge in cosmology to address it, right? At least the first, well, even the entire argument.
I don't really know, so I'd say I'm not familiar enough with the argument from a logic point of view to judge whether it's valid logically or not. I would say from a purely logical point of view, it seems reasonable to me, at least, except that it's simply simply cannot be demonstrated. Either of the premises cannot be demonstrated on the basis of modern physics.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we're done with this one. Thank you again for bringing your knowledge to this question. It's been a very interesting talk. I assume you don't have a channel, you don't have, yeah, you have publications, right? You sent me a link to your publications. I will put that as a link to the video. If I didn't already.
Scientific publications, though, I have to say, I'm not very much into
religious debate.
Outreach. Yeah, I'm not very much into outreach publications, at least yet. I was really focusing on my career in the past 15 years, which means I spend most of my time trying to write the best possible referred scientific papers that I could, instead of thinking of bringing more to the general public. But I have to say, I think that's a very important thing to do for us as scientists. Generally speaking, I think there is not enough good outreach being done by professional scientists. And sometimes we're just not equipped for it. I have to say, I don't know if I'm the best speaker in terms of making complex problems that I deal with from day-to-day basis. I don't know if I'm able, at least yet, to make these understandable to people who have very different backgrounds. But I think that's a very important thing to do, and maybe in the future I'll try to spend more time on it.
Yeah, I would love to help you with that, because I tend to have. Yeah, I'm really comfortable with explaining and detailing complex things. I'm in IT background. I work with a lot of programmers, and I'm the link between the programmers and the future users of the applications. And so that's my job, to explain the user's point of view to the programmers, and the programmers' point of view to the users. So maybe we could think about something along those lines. And what you're saying is true, because I see that when people are extremely focused on their business, it's sometimes very hard to get out from this language, this way of thinking, and talk to different people. And whether you're a programmer or a scientist or a politician or anything, it's always the same problem. So yeah, we could talk some ideas around about this if you're interested.
Sure, of course. Thanks for the offer.
Yeah. So thank you for coming again. Yes.
I hope that I was understandable for everyone. And yeah, thanks for the offer again.
And so I'm going to ask everyone, if you like the video, please share and subscribe. Under popular pressure, I'm going to set up a Patreon soon, so stay tuned. And in the meantime, see you next week. And thanks again for your presence, Dominique, and your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Bye.